We get caught up in the small stuff. The daily grind. The little worries that don't even matter. And the next thing you know, years have passed. But what if you woke up tomorrow, and you couldn't go back? What would you wish you'd done? What would you regret? And I don't want that for you. I want you to remember what this feels like right now, in this moment. I want you to take this seriously. Because we don't have forever. We don't have unlimited chances. This is the moment. Right now. So, when you look at your life, think about it. Are you living it in the way that you really want to? Or are you just drifting through, waiting for something to happen? Because trust me, you don't want to be caught in that place, wishing you had done more, wishing you had been present when you had the chance.
Hey, before we proceed into this mind-blowing experience, I just want to ask you, if this video resonates with you in any way, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet, so you never miss out on these powerful stories. And hey, share this with anyone who might need to hear it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, whether it's a prayer, a thought, or just how this story hit you. Let's get the conversation started.
Hello, my name is Sarah Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 2, and a middle school teacher. I lived an ordinary life, one filled with routines, laughter, struggles, and the occasional moment where I'd wonder what it all meant. I believed in God. Well, I thought I did, but faith was something I kept on the back burner, a thing I'd fully figure out later, when I had more time. It feels infinite when you're caught up in the day-to-day, doesn't it? We all assume there's more of it, more days, more chances, more time to get things right. But then, one day, time runs out. That day came for me on an ordinary Thursday. It started like any other. I remember rushing to get the kids ready for school, spilling coffee on my shirt, and mentally going over my lesson plans for the day. Life was busy, chaotic even, but that's how I liked it. By the afternoon, I was thinking about dinner plans and whether I'd have enough energy to help my daughter with her science project. And then it happened. I was driving home, tired but determined to make it to my son's soccer game. I remember the faint smell of rain in the air and how the light was just beginning to fade. I wasn't distracted, no phone in my hand, no music blasting. But none of that mattered. The car came out of nowhere. I didn't see it until it was too late. There was a screech of tires, the crunch of metal, and then, nothing. Just silence. I thought it was over. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my car. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, unsettling kind that makes you feel like something is about to happen. I wasn't in pain, but I wasn't at ease either. I looked around and realized I wasn't anywhere I recognized. There was no road, no sky, no landmarks, just a gray, endless space that felt both vast and suffocating at the same time. Then I saw my body. I can't explain what it's like to look at yourself from the outside, to see your own broken form lying there, lifeless. My car was crumpled like a tin can, glass scattered everywhere, blood pooling on the pavement. I watched as strangers rushed to the scene, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was still here, but I couldn't. It was as if I'd been cut off from the world I'd always known. And then I felt it. It wasn't a touch, exactly, but more like a pull, gentle yet impossible to resist. I didn't see where it was coming from, but I knew I had to follow it. I wasn't walking, or floating, or moving in any way I'd ever known before, yet I was being drawn toward something. As I moved, a figure began to appear in the distance. At first, it was just a faint shadow, but as it came closer, it became clearer. It wasn't human, at least not in the way we understand. There was something otherworldly about it, something that made me feel small and exposed. The figure didn't speak, but I could feel its presence like a weight on my soul. And then, without a single word, I understood why it was there. It was time for me to go. Let me ask you something. Have you ever thought about the moment your life ends? Not the vague idea of death we all push aside, but the exact moment it happens. What will you see? What will you feel? Will you be ready? I wasn't. If you think you have time, if you think you can fix things later, I'm here to tell you that later isn't promised. When the clock stops, it's over. And what comes next? Well, that's something you can't take lightly. Because what happened next to me wasn't what I expected. It wasn't peaceful, and it wasn't empty. It was something far more terrifying. The departure, crossing into the beyond. I don't know how to explain what happened next. One moment, I was staring at my body, lying broken on the road. The next, I was somewhere else. It wasn't a place I could name. There were no walls, no sky, no ground, just an endless space filled with this heavy, pressing silence. The kind that makes you feel like you're being watched, even when you're alone. Have you ever had a dream where you feel like you're falling, but you don't know where you'll land? That's how I felt. I was moving, but I wasn't walking. There was no wind, no force, yet I was being pulled, almost like gravity, towards something I couldn't see. My chest tightened with each passing moment. I wanted to stop, to turn around, but I couldn't. Then I realized, I wasn't in control. Let me ask you this, if you had to leave right now, leave everything behind, would you be ready? Think about it. Your family, your friends, the life you've built, all gone in an instant. Would you have any regrets? Because as I was being pulled through that endless void, all I could think about were the things I hadn't done. The times I was too busy to pray, the moments I brushed off that little voice inside me telling me to make things right. Regret isn't something you feel with your mind, it's something that burns in your soul. I don't know how long I floated in that silence. Minutes. Hours. It felt like forever. And then, suddenly, everything changed. There was a light in the distance. It wasn't warm or comforting like the stories you hear, it was sharp, piercing, like it could see through every part of me. As I got closer, I felt exposed, like I had no place to hide. That's when I noticed the figures. They were standing at the edge of the light, tall and still, like sentinels. At first, I thought they were people, but as I got closer, I realized they weren't. Their forms shimmered, almost like they were made of light and shadow at the same time. And their eyes didn't just look at you. They looked through you. I tried to speak, to ask where I was, but no words came out. One of the figures raised its hand, and in that moment, I felt everything I had ever done flash before me. Every word, every thought, every hidden sin. It was like a movie playing in my head, but there was no way to stop it. Have you ever wondered what your life would look like if someone saw it all? Not the version you show the world, but the real one, the thoughts you hide, the actions you excuse, the things you think no one sees. I didn't have to wonder anymore. As the memories played out, I felt smaller and smaller, like I was shrinking under the weight of my own life. I wanted to scream, to beg for another chance, but I couldn't. And then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. There was a heaviness in the air, like something was about to happen. The figure that had raised its hand stepped closer, and for the first time, I noticed something glowing in its palm. It was a mark, a symbol I didn't recognize, but it felt powerful. I didn't understand what it meant, but I knew it wasn't for me. The figure looked at me, and though it didn't speak, I felt its message clear as day: not everyone has the mark. I wanted to ask, what mark? How do I get it? But before I could, the light behind them grew brighter, and I felt myself being pulled again. This time, I wasn't just scared, I was terrified. Because I didn't know where I was going next. Let me ask you something else. Are you sure you're ready? Not just hoping, not just assuming, are you sure? Because if you're wrong, if you're not prepared, there's no going back. What happened to me after that moment changed everything. I thought I knew about life, death, and what comes after. And that's when I saw them, the angels. The encounter, the realm of angels and marks. When I saw them, I froze. The figures weren't like the ones before. These weren't shadows blending into the light, they were the light. Their presence didn't feel cold or distant. It was overwhelming, but in a way that made me feel every part of myself, the good, the bad, everything in between. They didn't look like how you'd picture angels, though. No wings, no halos. They were tall, radiant, and still. Like statues, but alive. Their eyes didn't just look through me like before, they held me. Let me ask you this, what would you do if you stood in front of something so powerful, so pure, that it made you question everything you've ever done? Would you feel proud? Or would you feel like you weren't enough? Because in that moment, I felt small. Not because they made me feel that way, but because I knew. I knew they saw everything, every thought I had, every word I spoke, every single choice. And yet, they didn't seem angry. They weren't harsh. They were waiting. The space around us felt heavy with silence. But it wasn't empty, no, it was filled with meaning. One of them moved forward, slowly, as if to give me time to understand what was happening. In its hand, it carried something glowing, just like the mark I'd seen before. Only this time, I felt it, this pull, this longing, deep inside me. I didn't need anyone to tell me what it was. It was the mark. Let me pause here and ask you something personal. Do you think you'd have it? The mark, I mean. Do you believe, deep in your heart, that you've lived in a way that would earn it? Or would you hesitate, just for a second, and wonder? That hesitation. It's the most haunting thing in the world. I wanted to reach for it. I wanted to hold it, to claim it as mine. But I couldn't move. Not because I was frozen in fear, but because I didn't know if it belonged to me. The angel didn't speak, but I felt its question. It wasn't a question I could answer with words. It was asking me something deeper, something only my soul could answer. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't up to me to decide if I deserved it. The other angels stepped forward, their forms shifting, shimmering like fire. Each carried something different, marks, symbols, glowing orbs. It was then I noticed the lines. Yes, lines. Long, stretching into the distance. People, like me, standing, waiting. Some looked calm, even peaceful. Others looked like they knew they wouldn't make it. That's when the fear hit me again. What if I wasn't marked? What would happen to me then? Let me ask you again, do you know where you stand? Do you feel secure, or is there a part of you whispering that you might not be ready? Because I can tell you this, when you're standing in front of something eternal, there's no pretending. You can't hide behind excuses, and you can't turn back the clock. I was about to find out what came next. The angel holding the mark turned to the others, and they began to speak, not with voices, but with thoughts that filled the air. It wasn't a language I could understand, yet I knew exactly what they were saying. They were deciding. And I realized, in that terrifying moment, that not everyone in that line would be given a mark. Some would. But others would face something much worse. I'll never forget the feeling of standing there, waiting, knowing that everything about me, everything, was laid bare for them to see. Do you think you could handle that? Knowing your entire life was being weighed, with no way to change it. That's when it happened. The angel lowered the mark, and for a moment, I thought it was for me. My heart raced as it moved closer, and I felt this strange mix of hope and dread. But then, it stopped. It wasn't for me. The silence around me shattered like glass, replaced by a sound I can only describe as despair itself. It wasn't coming from me, though. It was coming from the ones who didn't get a mark. Let me ask you one last thing before we go on. If you were standing there, in that line, would you know, without a doubt, that you'd be marked? Because if you're not sure, you need to hear what happens next. You need to hear what happens to the unmarked. The horror, the unmarked and their fate. I'll never forget the sound. It wasn't a scream, it was worse. It was a cry that didn't belong in this world. It was raw, hollow, like all hope had been ripped away and nothing was left. It came from someone standing just a few steps ahead of me in the line. They weren't marked. The light around them dimmed, and the angels stepped back, their glowing forms shifting as if to say, "This one is not ours." That's when I saw it, the shadows I thought I'd escaped. They came from nowhere, moving like smoke but with purpose. They wrapped around the unmarked person, dragging them away from the line, away from the light, into the darkness. They tried to fight. I could see their arms flailing, their mouth open in silent terror. But it didn't matter. The shadows were too strong. Let me ask you something. What do you fear most? Is it pain? Losing someone you love? The unknown? Because watching what happened next, it was all of that, multiplied by something I can't even describe. The shadows didn't just take them. They pulled them into a place where no light could reach. And the worst part, the angels didn't stop it. They didn't even look. It was as if this was how it had to be. The line moved forward, but the echoes of that cry stayed with me. I couldn't shake the thought, what if that's me? What if I'm next? I glanced at the faces around me. Some were calm, almost peaceful, as if they knew their mark was waiting for them. Others looked like me, nervous, unsure, praying in silence. And then there were the ones who knew. You could see it in their eyes. They weren't marked, and they knew what was coming. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If you were there, standing in that line, would you feel confident? Or would you feel that sinking doubt creeping in? Because in that moment, I couldn't lie to myself. I didn't know. The shadows came again, this time for someone further back. They didn't resist like the first person. They just stood there, frozen, as the darkness swallowed them whole. And the line moved on. When it was finally my turn, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my legs felt weak. One of the angels stepped forward, holding the mark. It was glowing, warm, like it was alive. But they didn't give it to me right away. Instead, they stared at me, not just at me, but into me. I don't know how long we stood there, but it felt like an eternity. And then, without a word, they raised the mark. I need you to think about this carefully. What would it mean for you if you were given the mark? Would you feel relief? Joy? Or would you be overwhelmed, knowing what it truly represents? Because as I stood there, waiting, I realized the mark wasn't just a symbol. It was a decision, a reflection of everything I had done, everything I had been. And then, just as I thought my fate was sealed, the angel lowered the mark and stepped back. It wasn't over. Not yet. The light around me flickered, and I felt something shift. The angels turned their attention elsewhere, as if there was more to decide. And in that moment, I knew there was something I still didn't understand, something about how the mark is given, and what it truly means. But I wasn't ready for the answer. Not yet. Are you ready to hear it? Are you ready to know how the mark is given, and what it says about you? Because what came next changed everything. The revelation, how the mark is given. Do you want to know the truth? The real truth about how the mark is given? I'll warn you, it's not what you think. It's not a stamp, or a label, or something that can be handed to you like a trophy. No, it's something much deeper. And once you understand, you'll never see yourself the same way again. When the angel stepped back, I felt exposed, like everything about me was laid bare. I wasn't being judged for what people saw on the outside. They weren't looking at my clothes, my face, or even my words. They were looking at my soul. Every thought I'd ever had, every choice I'd ever made, it was all there, written in some invisible language that only they could read. And it wasn't just the big things. It was the small things too. The moments when I thought no one was watching. The times I had turned away when I could have helped someone. The lies I had told myself to feel better. Let me ask you this, if your soul were a book, what would it say about you? Would it be a story of kindness and courage? Or would it be something harder to read? As I stood there, the angel raised their hand, and the mark began to form. But here's the thing, it didn't come from them. It came from me. It was like my own choices were shaping it. The times I had loved others, even when it was hard. The times I had forgiven, even when I didn't want to. Those moments lit up, creating the mark piece by piece. But there were also gaps. Empty spaces where the light should have been. Those were the times I had chosen hate over love, fear over courage, or selfishness over kindness. I couldn't hide from it. And neither could anyone else. The line behind me grew quieter, and I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. They were watching, wondering how their own marks would look. And I wondered too. Would my mark be enough? Was the light strong enough to cover the gaps? I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. And then I realized something. The mark wasn't just about what I had done. It was about what I had become. Have you ever thought about that? What have you become? Not the person you pretend to be, but the real you. The you that shows up when no one else is around. Because that's what the mark reflects. Not your job, or your success, or even your failures. It's the choices you've made when no one else was looking. The angel didn't speak, but I could feel their message as clearly as if they had. The mark wasn't a reward. It wasn't something you could earn by being perfect. It was a reflection of your heart. And for the first time, I understood why some were unmarked. They hadn't chosen the darkness, it had chosen them. Every time they had ignored the light, the shadows grew stronger. And by the time they stood in that line, the darkness had already claimed them. So I'll ask you again, what would your mark look like? Would it shine bright enough to push back the darkness? Or would it flicker, struggling to stay alive? As the angel lowered their hand, the light around me stabilized. I felt relief, but it didn't last. Because I realized the process wasn't over. There was one more step. The line moved forward again, but this time, it wasn't towards the light. It was towards something else. Something I didn't expect. Do you think you know what happens next? Because trust me, you don't. Next was the hardest part. The part that would change everything. It was the return. And let me tell you, coming back wasn't what I wanted. But it was what I needed. The return, a second chance. Have you ever thought about what it would feel like to wake up in a different reality? One moment, you're standing at the edge of eternity, and the next, you're back here, breathing, moving, alive. That's what happened to me. But let me tell you, coming back wasn't the relief you might think it is. It felt heavy. Like carrying a weight I didn't know how to hold. The moment I was told I had to return, I froze. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just stood there, silent, trying to understand why. Why me? Why now? I thought I had seen everything I needed to see. Felt everything I needed to feel. But apparently, that wasn't enough. They told me I still had work to do. And just like that, I was pulled away. Have you ever woken up from a dream that felt more real than your life? That's what it felt like. My body was the same, but my mind wasn't. My soul wasn't. Everything around me looked different, like I was seeing it for the first time. The colors were sharper, but the shadows felt darker. I remember blinking and looking at my hands. They felt small and fragile, almost like they didn't belong to me anymore. That's when it hit me. I had been given a second chance, but I didn't know what to do with it. What would you do if you were sent back? Would you know where to start? The memories of what I had seen wouldn't leave me alone. The light. The mark. The choices. I couldn't stop thinking about the people who were still unmarked, wandering in the shadows, unaware of what was coming. And then, there was the question that haunted me the most. What if I had stayed unmarked? What if I had never seen the light? I couldn't let it go. And maybe that's why I was sent back. To figure it out. To do something about it. But here's the hard part. Coming back doesn't mean everything changes overnight. You still have the same life, the same problems, the same habits. It's easy to think, I'll do it later. I have time. But you don't. Time doesn't wait. It doesn't pause so you can figure things out. It just keeps going. And every day you wait is another day you could have made a difference. I know this sounds heavy. It is. But here's what I learned. Second chances aren't gifts. They're responsibilities. When I was sent back, I wasn't given a clear path or a step-by-step guide. I was given a choice. The same choice you have right now. You can let the days pass by, or you can start making them count. So, what will you do? That's the real question, isn't it? It's not about what I've seen or what I've done since I came back. It's about you. Because one day, you'll stand where I stood. You'll face the light, the mark, the truth about yourself. And when that day comes, will you be ready? But before you answer that, there's one more thing you need to hear. Something that will make everything I've said so far matter even more. Let's talk about your next move. Let's talk about the call to action. Are you ready? Now, I need to ask you something that's been on my mind since I came back. What will you do? I know it sounds like a simple question, but it's not. It's everything. You see, there's something about that moment when you realize you're standing on the edge of something bigger than you can imagine. Something more than just your daily routine, your usual choices, your little plans. In that moment, I didn't know if I was ready, but I had no choice. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It's like standing on a cliff, feeling the wind, knowing you can jump, but not knowing what's on the other side. The real question is, will you take the leap? Are you going to continue with the same habits, the same thoughts, the same life? Or will you step up and start making choices that matter? Because time, it doesn't stop for you. It doesn't give you another chance. The world is moving, and the people around you. They're living their lives, but they're also looking for a sign. They're waiting for someone to lead the way. Will that person be you? Every day is an opportunity to make a difference, to change your life, to change the lives of the people around you. But if you keep waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect time, you'll miss it. I promise you, this moment, this now, it's all you've got. If you don't act, you'll be just like everyone else, stuck in the cycle, waiting, wondering, asking, what if? So, let me ask again, what will you do? Will you keep standing still, or will you make a move? Will you take responsibility for your life and what's coming, or will you let it pass you by? I can feel the hesitation, I can hear the doubt in your mind. But you can't afford to let fear stop you. Trust me, the fear you feel right now, that's the sign that you need to act. It's that spark telling you that something big is waiting for you. And when you start moving, when you stop holding back, that's when the changes start happening. But I won't lie to you. It's going to be tough. There will be moments when you'll feel like giving up, when you'll want to turn around. But remember this, you are the one who can decide what happens next. Now, the question stands. Will you choose to do something about it? Will you step into your power, or will you let this chance slip through your fingers? You're the one who has the key. You have the power to decide. What will you do? But before you rush into any decision, there's one last thing I need to tell you. It's something you won't want to ignore. Something you can't ignore. It's a sobering reminder of what all of this means. Let's move on. So, here we are, at the end of this story. But I can't just leave you hanging without saying this one last thing. Do you remember what I told you about the moment I left everything behind? The decision, the wait, the feeling of knowing that I didn't have any more time to waste. That feeling didn't go away. It didn't fade. It stayed with me, even when I came back. And that's why I'm here, talking to you now. I'm sharing this story not just because I can, but because you need to hear it. You need to understand that life is short. We're not promised tomorrow. It's a sobering thought, right? I know. But that's the truth. And deep down, you know it too. We get caught up in the small stuff. The daily grind. The little worries that don't even matter. And the next thing you know, years have passed. But what if you woke up tomorrow, and you couldn't go back? What would you wish you'd done? What would you regret? Here's the thing. The moment I came back, I didn't just get a second chance. I got a warning. Life isn't something we can take for granted. Time isn't endless. And if we're not careful, we'll waste it, doing things that don't really matter. And I don't want that for you. I want you to remember what this feels like right now, in this moment. I want you to take this seriously. Because we don't have forever. We don't have unlimited chances. This is the moment. Right now. So, when you look at your life, think about it. Are you living it in the way that you really want to? Or are you just drifting through, waiting for something to happen? Because trust me, you don't want to be caught in that place, wishing you had done more, wishing you had been present when you had the chance. So, as you leave here today, ask yourself, what will you do with the time you have left? Take action. Don't wait. Life is here, right now, and it's not waiting for you to catch up. Let that be the reminder you carry with you. Because the next time you feel like life is moving too fast or too slow, just remember, the clock's ticking. And you're the one who decides how you spend it. Now go. Make something of your life. You don't have a moment to lose.
If this story made you think, made you feel, then let's keep this energy going. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you won't miss out on any more powerful journeys like this. I want to hear from you, whether you want to share a prayer or just reflect on what you've heard today. Drop a comment below. Let's keep this connection alive. And as always, share it with someone who could really use this. See you in the next one.